I had just returned from Brazil, where I'd been producing a picture, Dino Laurentiis picture, and it was tired and it was a hard picture, and Bud called over the weekend, and my kids were there on a weekend jaunt to stay with me in London from school, and he asked me if I would produce this picture, pop picture, with a group for very, very cheap, a very limited budget, and do it very quickly. I know you're the only man that can do it. I said, what is it, Bud? He said, the Beatles. I said, I will not do it, not because it's the Beatles, but I don't want to do a pop picture. I just don't want to do one at this stage. Put the phone down, don't worry about it, Dennis. I'll see you in a couple of days for a glass of whiskey or something. My kids said, Dad, you must be mad. You have to do the Beatles picture. You have to. We want to meet them. So they obviously knew them. I didn't. So I called Bud back. He said, 4 weeks. I'll give you 4 weeks. So he said, great, it's a deal. And the first time I met them was on the train, because I had to explain to them that, we shot things out of sequence, and, they had to be there on time, and they had to, comply with this and do it. And it was great. It was great. There wasn't a murmur of dissent. They just wanted to do it, and they were enjoying being together on a train with a lot of people. In fact, I think one of them turned out and married one, didn't he? George.
I'm sorry, miss. You mustn't fraternise with me prisoners.
Prisoners?
Convict in transit. Typical old lads, the lot of them.
You are?
Get out, ladies! Get out while you can!
And that was the start of it. And that was the start of it. And it was great. It was really great. The first conversation was, where do you plan to shoot the picture? Walter and Dick said, we're shooting it in Liverpool. I said, well, you cannot do it on this sort of money that Bud has just told me. I mean, I think he offered me £150,000 budget to do the picture. Bear in mind also that the script, from the first draft script, which was a lovely script written by Alan Owen, was written as a film, which it was going to be. But he was always trained and understood that, you went to location, to cut, to over shoulders, to this, to that. All of that eventually was taken out of the script, and everything was done in limited form, and it worked remarkably well. And it was Richard's way of shooting, and we all helped with our choice of locations and sets by the virtue of inhibiting the interiors and making them confined and small, and letting everything outside go wild, big and free. It worked tremendously well, but it was great. It was just great. But what was extraordinary? There was never any embarrassment with any actor playing against the Beatles, and there was never any embarrassment against Beatles playing against major actors.
When I say stay put, I mean stay put.
Don't cane me, sir. I was led astray.
Oh, shut up, John. They're waiting for you in the studio.
They're perfectionists. They have a natural ability. Bearing in mind, it's the first time they've been in front of a camera, on a film set. And they carried a whole film, a feature film that was going to be shown around the world to millions of people. I thought it was amazing, really. In those days, you see, television was in its early stages, and they never had television studios like we have now, great enormous monolith buildings. They used to use old, dark theatres, the old sort of music halls theatres. And I had been to this theatre years earlier and took my kids to see Peter Pan, because I think that's the only thing they ever played there every Christmas. And I thought that would be wonderful. And I said to Richard, and I think he knew, I can't remember whether he knew the theatre or not, but I went down and saw them and arranged to take over the entire theatre for 6 days, I think it was. And we could use any part of it. So, because I used it for, several of the sets. It saved a fortune in building sets. So we used it there, and it worked fantastically well. Now, the interesting thing was that the art department at that time, and we had we had a very tight budget. The art department came to my office and said they got all the equipment. It was being very, very expensive and very costly. Cameras, television tubes, monitors, a lot of money. And in those days they had a limited life, you know, when you used them, those things. And when he told me the price of it, I nearly threw a fit. I said, let me think about it. I'm sitting in the office. Walter Shenton was in the office, and he was the producer of the picture, as you know. I was the associate producer. I said, Walter, you have to forgive me. I asked to speak to Sir Joseph Lockwood, who was head of EMI. Oh, he's at a meeting, can't be disturbed. I said, well, you tell him it's terribly important, and I'm producing a Beatles picture, and I wanted to speak to him. It came on the phone. I said, my art director has just been to Bush to order all this equipment. He's working out some sort of publicity arrangement. It suddenly struck me, Sir Joseph, that this might not be good for your company doing their records. Please don't do that. I will send you all the camera equipment, including transport, Sir Joseph. Yes. And they sent a lot. Free. Nothing. And we overwhelmed that stage with equipment, as you could see in the film. We managed to put together a crew of top flight people for bottom flight money. And they were, I mean, for example, the cameraman had done Doctor Strangelove and major movies and the whole thing. But he had worked with Richard before, so we started with him. He came with marvellous operators and people like that. I came with marvellous editors and people like that, and we put together, and it was, I suppose it must have been more luck than judgment, one of the best crews that I had ever worked with on one of the lowest budget pictures that I'd ever worked with. And it was one of those remarkable things. And everybody on the crew, there was, I can't remember one dissent, one bad day, one argument. They were absolutely terrific. And the frenzy with which the picture was made, you know, would normally start that sort of neurosis, you know, by these people. Not one bit of it. And they all loved it. And it was an extraordinary thing. It was an excellent crew. By the time we'd started shooting, there was a sort of buzz around that this group was great, you know, and they were going to be around a long time. Although I have to say, the financiers didn't think so. In fact, the instruction to me was, please get it over quick, because these guys are not going to last. But, you know, when you think the picture was 37 years ago, whatever it was, in 1964, it's an amazing statement. But no, up to that point, every damn pop picture that had been made was pretty awful when you think about it. All of them were staged musicals. You know, the girl had to get the boy had to get the girl, and there were staged musicals. There was nothing in this that was a stage musical. It was the first picture shot in the manner of the early French movies, cinéma vérité, with allowing people to wander in and out, accomplished actors, to wander in and out and do their thing. And it opened up a whole refreshing area of music and picture, which was a musical, basically. But I mean, nobody ever regarded it as a musical, but it was a musical, really. And I think that took the critics' eye. They suddenly realized that there were four talented young men with the most beautiful music in the world, and they were acquitting themselves really well on the screen, you know, really well. So, and by the way, they were pretty good-looking guys too in those days. Well, it actually changed my life in films and opened my eye. Apart from the fact that I worked with the Beatles, you know, for a long time after, it opened my eyes to the possibility of making any sort of film, which I loved. So it did change my life in that respect. And Richard and I went on, as we say, became partners and made 9 films together, you know, which is a pretty track record. I don't know another producer that ever found a director he could work with for 9 pictures. Normally they shoot each other after 2, you know.
The entire creative input as to what this movie should be and how to maximize the talents of this extraordinary group of young men came from Dick Lester, Alan Owen, and Walter Shenson. Whatever they were comfortable with, I was going to be comfortable with. It's going to have songs. I'm going to get the album, got the publishing rights. I've got a movie that had gone from £60,000 to perhaps £200,000, but I had one of the biggest, musical acts in England, certainly, and who knows where they might go after that. And I never sat in a meeting. I never even met them, literally, until after the movie. So I can't take any credit except for being lucky and smart enough to make the deal in the first place. I'd seen Running, Jumping, Standing Still, which is really why I wanted to be in business with Dick Lester, because he had an eye and an imagination and a style that I thought was unique. I approved this in black and white. I approved the concept of it. And Dick delivered something totally unexpected, and that's what was so exciting about it. And I just remember the energy of the movie. That's the thing that sticks in my head, is the movement of the movie, the use of the frame and how Richard and his cameraman filled it. The old ladies on the street watching, the kind of stuff that made the film so unexpected and so untraditional, while at the same time dealing with a genre that is pretty hackneyed. I mean, there've been some good Elvis Presley movies, but mostly it's Elvis singing. Dick Lester, in his unique vision of film, really is unlike any other director. And I worked with Dick many times after that. And what's extraordinary about him is he's capable of making almost any style movie that the material lends itself to. And this was the choice he made, and I just was bowled over by it because it was groundbreaking. I mean, this was what, 1964? They're still using the techniques. Half the videos you look at today, all of that stuff, all derived, I think, from what Dick and his team brought to this movie. We became Dick Lester fans, obviously, and we made several movies with Dick. That we made The Knack and How I Won the War and Bed Sitting Room, and subsequent to that I produced films with Dick. We did Raw Flash together and we did Juggernaut together, and we've been friends ever since. Hard Day's Night has been part of the fabric of my business and personal life since it was a movie. That movie has impacted on people's lives in so many ways. It's just extraordinary. Screenwriters, film directors. It is a milestone movie, and we were really lucky to be part of it.
Well, I was a scriptwriter many years ago for a television series, amongst other things, called Idiot Weekly Price Tuppence, which starred Peter Sellers and various other people. And one week Eric Sykes went ill, and he was supposed to be doing a series of little quickies. And the director, a man called Dick Lester, in his infinite wisdom said, "We've already ordered the costume, and you're nearest to Eric in size, so you'll have to..." I wasn't even in equity. Never been on television in my life. So I did this series of quick sketches about two duelists with an actor whose name was Alan Owen. Time passed, and I saw him, it must have been 3-4 years later, and in comes Alan Owen again. "What are you doing?" He said, "I've got a job for you." He said, "I've been asked to write this film about a pop group." So I said, "Oh yeah, would you like to do it?" Oh, I said, "Yeah, very much." "Right," he said, "I'll phone you." Phoned a couple of days later and said, "Come up to studio in Piccadilly and meet director, Dick Lester, who I knew, producer, Walter Shenson, and the Beatles." He said, "By the way, I feel I should tell you, they're very nervous and they want to be surrounded by genuine Scousers." He said, "Now I know you can do it because I've heard you. Do it from the minute you walk into the room." So we met up in this little room and chatted away. "You all right?" "Yeah, fine, lovely, smashing." "All right, sit down, thanks." And that was when I said to George, "Can you tell me something about Mal, because that's who my character's vaguely based on?" He said, "Yeah, I can tell you about Mal." He said, "He looks after our luggage when we move. And we've just come back from New York, and the luggage is in Iceland."
Hey, here. Those yours?
No, they're for Ringo.
Must have cost you a fortune in stamps, Ringo.
They came in, they sat down, they listened to what they were told, they watched Norman, they watched me, and they did it. And they were good. They went home, and they learnt their words, and they came in, and they said them. They weren't Beatles and I was an actor. We were all actors in a scene, playing off each other, and that's what I'm saying. They were so brilliant and so non-starry and so generous, it was no problem at all.
I've a good mind to thump you, Shake.
Hey, if you're gonna have a Barney, can I hold your coat?
He started it.
I did not, you did.
I'd seen, I think, about 10 minutes of one of their concerts one night on a television, full of youngsters. And I didn't hear a word they sang or a word they spoke. And I thought, I don't know what all that's about, I'm going out. So I'm eternally grateful that I got the part in the film, because I realised, you know, what sensational music they were producing. My most vivid memory of the Scala Theatre is standing with Walter Shenson one afternoon at tea break. And he said, "John, all these beautiful girls, haven't you found yourselves one yet?" I said, "Walter, you know what it's like when you're a kid and they put you in a sweet shop. By the time you've made your mind up, it's closed."
Hey, who's the little old man?
It's Paul's grandfather.
I had arranged to meet George somewhere for a drink, and he got there very early and was fed up waiting on his own, so he thought he'd phone me. Didn't have my phone number. I was living in a bedsit in Chalk Farm. So he looked through the telephone directory and found only one Junkin, which was my mother and father, who lived in East London. I said, "Hello? Can I speak to John Junkin, please?" She said, "Senior or junior?" "Oh," he said, "I think it'll be junior." She said, "Who wants him?" He said, "It's George Harrison, actually." And my mother dropped the phone, ran into the other room where my father's sitting. "There's a Beatle on the phone, there's a Beatle on the phone." And my father went, "Oh, God," took his slipper off and went to kill it for her. To do was delight and fun, and I knew it was good, but I never ever dreamt it would have the durability that it's had. And the other thing, of course, is it was probably 6 of the happiest weeks of my working life. I got paid as well.
Well, I first met Paul in a clothes shop in Old Compton Street in London, and I was buying something and he was buying something, and he said, "Oh, you're Lionel Blair, aren't you, on the Mike and Bernie Winter Show?" I said, "Yes." He said, I'm with a group called the Beatles." I said, "The what?" He said, "The Beatles." He said, "We're playing in Hamburg at the moment in Germany," which was the Star Club, which is where everybody played. And I would think that that must have been with Pete Best, was pre-Ringo. Anyway, so then their first record came out, and of course it was enormous. And the Mike and Bernie Winters Show at that time, which was a big television comedy show, for our friends in America, it was like Wayne and Schuster and people like that would know. They were our star guests on one of the shows called Big Night Out. And then I was approached. They said, "We're going to make a movie of the Beatles." And I'd known Walter Shenson. He said, "I've seen you on all your shows. Now, will you do a thing? We're doing a theatre scene in the movie, and we'd like you and your girls." And I said, "Wonderful." Well, the funny thing was, he said, "I don't want any rehearsal, just a bit of dancing." And then when we got to the show, he said, "This is what we want you to dance to." And there was this bit of music, and my girls and I had done so many television shows together. I used to do three big shows a week. I said, "Do step number 12, step number 19, step number 14, or whatever." And we made up the routine there and then on the set. And then Dick would say, "Well, can you do that step, this shot, this angle, that angle?" During our routine, I remember Dick said, "I want something funny going across while you're doing all your dancing and everything." And I said, "Well, why don't I pull?" And Paul said, "Oh, no, I don't want to do that." And what they did was, you know how sometimes in a movie you see like a running thing? Well, it was before computers, so we did it frame by frame. It was never put in the movie, but I remember it took about 3 hours to shoot. It was only one day's filming, but again, they were just wonderful. And between takes, Paul was over at a piano. He said, "I've got this tune going round in my head," and he was tinkling, and he wrote Yesterday. They kind of liked what we were, the older stars, or the people that had been on the box for a long time. They almost revered us. They were very polite to us and very nice to us and respected and had respect for us. I thought they were wonderful. I just thought they were wonderful.
I got cast because I was very close to the author of this film, Alan Owen. I'd done a lot of his work. I was also a busy actor around town, and They wanted someone who could do it fast, because I was in a play at night. I knew he was going to write, in whatever satirical way, a comment on British stuffy London society. That's what the film is about. These boys wreck London.
I wouldn't be seen dead in them. The dead grotty.
He was perfectly charming. There was one point he killed a take when he said, "Hey, this lad's not doing bad." He didn't realise the camera was on me, and that's nothing, that's nothing. Once he was told, "Wait a minute, you're out of the shot," it's on camera, he said, "Oh, we'd never do that again."
Where's the calendar? Oh, no, it's all right. He's just a troublemaker. The change isn't due for 3 weeks yet. All the same, make a note not to extend Susan's contract. Let's not take any unnecessary chances.
He's completely, totally ignorant of what is happening, which is so often true of marketing men. In the scene, it's cleverly articulated. This man comes out with such a lot of jargon that he wanted someone who could handle jargon.
Good. Give him whatever it is they drink. A Coca-Rama?
A tar?
Well, at least he's polite.
Those days, you see, we would often be in a show at night and film. That doesn't happen so much now. Trying to think of, the play was The Tempest at Stratford. I was in the company, not in the production. The lines were, "I bring you bats and horned toads and beetles." And this schoolgirl audience just erupted at Stratford-on-Avon, which is funny. Very funny. And later on there's the other line, "She loves you." Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very difficult for the cast to continue. Well, it's very important to know that these lads are from Liverpool, and the roots of that music. I'm an Irish fella grew up in Yorkshire, and I find him something very basic and folk behind what they're doing, very northern to me. I mean it. There's something there that strikes a chord. Now, that chord, for instance, you can hear in Kentucky or West Virginia. Folky, Irishy. Although it's rocked up, it's still a basic thing from the heart, which is quite eternal. A lot of the other groups were going on a gimmick. They didn't go on a gimmick, they just played what they liked to play.
Action.
That was brilliant because it was a really difficult shot to get right. You know, back in one sunny day in April 1964, I was shooting down here with Ringo on this towpath down by the River Thames. Of course, he was wearing these clothes and I was the little kid trying to hit him with that tyre. I got cast in it quite simply because they went through the normal process. You went for an audition for everything that you did. There were loads and loads of castings. I was a kid actor. And I'd done quite a bit of work, and it was all terribly secret. And I remember going into the room and was given this white folder, this thick white thing. So I thought, oh, it's a film, you know. And I had a look at it, but it had nothing on it, just in white folder, no name, no anything at all. And as I started to look, and you opened the first page, and it said John, Paul, George, and Ringo, and this sort of realization come over me, and I thought, my God, it's something to do with the Beatles. But at that point, I still didn't know what it was. So we went to the page in the script and read and just had a look at this scene. And it was just Ringo, 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 and it just said boy, boy, boy. And I thought, and I was looking through it. And then I remember I did start to get quite excited about it all because I thought, my God, this is going to be really something. So, of course, for the next day or 2 days, however long it took, I was just sitting, everybody was just sitting and waiting, except nobody else knew at school, was still not allowed to know what it was that I'd been up for. And I remember she came running out, the principal, and she said, David, I've got to talk to you, I've got to talk to you. And she dragged me out of and upstairs, and she was so excited. She said, you've got the part, and everything else. And it went round the school like wildfire then, that I was going to be doing this film with the Beatles. And I remember we arrived at the studios, and then we went and put the costume on. Which was actually just, you know, you always brought along your own clothes. the costume wasn't provided, it was your own clothes. So they were my jeans, and they were my trainers, and that was my little jumper, and it was my shirt, and all of that sort of thing. And so we went through with somebody, I don't think it wasn't Richard, but we went through with whoever just to decide what we were going to wear, put all that on, and then we hung around and waited for a little bit, and then waited for a bit longer. And then Ringo arrived, and they did the setup and everything else. And this is when they started to do the first setup, quite simple, just knock him over with the tyre. But as the tyre has a life of its own, and the tyre would not go anywhere near him, and everybody was doing it. The whole crew were doing it. They were all taking turns to bowl this tyre, and it just kept sailing past him, either side, falling out, and never got there at all. And then eventually, Dick said, you know, get the boy, get someone, and I was taken up there to roll the tyre over, and actually, eventually, we got it to hit him, and I was in there, and there I was doing the scene. I think he was a little bit nervous. I think maybe it was because he was out filming on his own and he didn't have the boys with him. Maybe it was because he wasn't working with adults, and working with a kid unnerved him a little bit, because maybe he didn't know how to behave or whatever. He was slightly nervous about it to start with. But then once we'd actually got into it and started, and we'd run through the whole scene a few times and everything else with camera, and then he started to relax a little bit, and it was nice. We did have fun doing it. I think one of the interesting things for me was at one point when we were actually filming, and it wasn't that Ringo was forgetting lines or anything. It was just, I suppose, an interpretation that Dick wanted on it, and to lighten it up or whatever. And Ringo did actually turn around at one point and say, "Well, it's all right for him. He's used to this." So I suppose, and then I felt like the veteran actor at 14 working with this icon, you know. But I never actually felt that. I never felt totally in awe of him, which is a huge, I suppose. It's just a nice tribute to him, because that's how the whole thing, I think everybody that worked on the film said it was just so easy. It was so easy working with the boys. Actually, in the film, as it is now, there's, you know, when Wilfrid Bramble's trying to get into the hotel, back into the Scala Theatre, and there's 3 boys there. Well, originally that was me. I was going to be doing that, because I was sort of like now the ringleader of the gang, if you like. But in the interim between filming down at Kew and actually, by the time we were filming everything at the Scala, I was doing a drama for the BBC, and I couldn't get away in the morning to do that actual little scene. And I arrived literally at around about lunchtime, just before lunch, with my chaperone to do it. And by that time, they'd already started to do that little setup, and so the lines were shared out between the other 3 boys, which is quite nice in a way.
Sixpence each in advance.
Everybody then wanted to know, you know, what it was like, what were we doing. And a lot of, funny enough, 2 or 3 of the people, they said, well, can we go down to the studios tomorrow? And can we go and meet them and everything else? And I was saying, it's not quite like that. You can't just pop into the studio, because security was, you know, really tight everywhere and everything else. I said, you can't just do that. But I did go down one day, literally at just one evening. So I ended up being one of the hundreds of kids outside waiting for them to come out. And I don't know, and the guy I was with, I remember his name was Peter, and I'm sure he was expecting that when one of them come out, they were going to go, "Hi, David, come on in," and all of that sort of thing. And of course, and somebody came out in a car and just whizzed past, and the look that I got from him afterwards was, "Well, why didn't you say something? Why aren't we in that car with them?" And it was it. And it was interesting to be on the other side of it as well, to be in amongst the crowd that were actually sort of going berserk for people in a situation that I'd been in, you know, not that long ago, because I did get stuck in, well, not stuck in a car, we were thrown in the car when we were out filming, because it was all barricaded off up at Kew, and they knocked the barricades down and come running on, and we having clambered up the bank, and the car was there, and people said, "Right, in you get," and they opened, and literally it was like the doors were open, and Ringo jumped in, I jumped in, the doors were shut, and then as the car tried to move, all these kids come running down, and then they were just hammering on the doors, on the windows, everything, and you can't go anywhere because you can't knock them down. You have to just hope that the car can slowly move forward and you get through it. But Ringo just sat in the back and was just sort of going, oh yeah, you know, that's what, it's a normal. I was sitting there going, my God, this is, you know, there are people, they're going to bash through the roof, and what's going to happen? And it was quite frightening. But I think for all of the boys, it was just such a common occurrence for them. And how on earth they remained sane, not just through, I think, through their whole career, was, I sampled just that much of it, a tiny little bit of it. But to think that there was 4 guys there that couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. I know everybody has it nowadays. You know, we always say the big stars do it. You know, you have David Beckham, all the sports stars. But I don't think anybody had it to that extent. And it's certainly not then, where they couldn't even walk out of their front door. They couldn't do anything without getting mobbed. They had no privacy whatsoever. And when they did go out, they were constantly being pulled about and hammered all over the place. It must have been, I don't know how they managed to stay sane and to actually keep their own identities and end up being the guys that they were. What was really nice, we sat down, there was myself and my chaperone. We were sitting down and it was lunch. And I think, as must have been normal, there was a press conference. And they all just got up, when they'd had enough of the press, I think, they got up and came down, and they all just came up and said, "We've just seen what you shot down, that was really good, and it was really nice and great," and all that sort of thing, and all shook their hand. And as they walked off, the press then got up and all come down and started taking photographs of me and my chaperone and sort of started asking questions. I thought, this is crazy. And while they were doing that, the people were going around emptying the cigarette ends and things out of the ashtrays into plastic bags because the Beatles had been there smoking. As things sort of progressed, as my career progressed, and I sort of grew up, I was always surprised at the amount of people that would come up and say, weren't you in the film? Weren't you in A Hard Day's Night? Were you that little boy in A Hard Day's Night? And I said, yeah. Somehow you almost feel as if you are part of the Beatles era. I mean, much more than anybody else. But having done lots and lots of other things, and you can get used to sort of, if you like, the public turning around and if somebody said, "Oh, I was watching that," and were you that little kid? But it always amazes me because I don't think I look anything like that little kid that was up there anymore. But I obviously still do. But yeah, the whole thing was Beatlemania. And that's how it was. Gotta go. Gotta get the clothes back to Ringo. Come on, mate, back to the workshop.
Well, I was happy to be on Broadway in a musical called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. And the star was Anthony Newley, music by Leslie Bricusse. I won the Tony Award, which was wonderful. And I came back to England, and within a very short time, I got this script, and I was asked to do the Beatles film.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, wait a minute. Don't
No,
tell
I'm
me
not.
you're- Oh, you are.
I'm not.
Oh, you are. I know you are.
I'm not now.
You look just like him.
I was thrilled, and came along to Twickenham, and was nervous to see the 3 Beatles having their hair washed, shiny hair. Then I had the scene, and Dick Lester was super, and John Lennon was extraordinary. He was laid back, kind. I felt that John Lennon was very much a performer to be reckoned with. He seemed to me to be, as it were, an experienced actor. He knew exactly what he was doing, and it was very easy, knew just how to do it, how to turn, how to do everything. I was very full of admiration for him.
No, my eyes are lighter. All right, Noddy.
I ran into John Lennon many years later in London, and I was struck by the extraordinary difference. You see, he was, you know, rather fresh-faced, bright, and looked a little bit, not like, wouldn't say he was svelte. He was, you know, and then when I saw him in London, he seemed taller, thinner, wearing a sort of long Macintosh and round glasses and long hair, and he looked like a rather beautiful, an aesthetic monk. And it was strange.
Did you exchange?
Yes, said hello and everything, and he remembered me and just said hello. But of course I was then again in awe, because by that time he was an icon and has become more so.
You don't look like him at all.
I'm a bit sad because that scene originally finished with John Lennon giving me a wink, and then I winked back. unfortunately, as sometimes happens, those winks were lost and were never shown in the final film. So here, for the first time ever, is the missing wink.
She looks more like him than I do.
Well, in London at that time, you know, the Beatles were in the same nightclubs I was in. Walter Shenson, who was, you know, connected with the film, knew me. And it was one of those things where somebody would say to you, would you like to be in a movie with the Beatles? And you say, great, because I love the music, I know them. Yes, of course, I will be in it. And it was also shot in a nightclub I belonged to called the Garrison, which was quite a famous nightclub at the time. And so I found myself very at home dancing away in a place I was dancing in every night anyway after I'd come out of the theatre, because I was in a long-running show at the time. So it was really no big effort for me, but great fun. And I mean, now part of history, really. In fact, Albert Finney said to me, I was watching Hard Day's Night in Tokyo, he said, and suddenly you appear to be propelled like a rocket out of a dance scene. He said, the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen. The Japanese roared with laughter. They thought that was very funny. I said, well, that was my normal dancing, actually. They said, you know, whatever you do, Ringo's going to do whatever you do. And I thought, well, let's see if he can jump as well. But I used to often jump. I mean, I was completely mad in those days, obviously. And I would do a lot of jumping up and looking around and coming down again. And then a lot of other people would start jumping. Ringo, he jumped about 3 inches off the ground, I think, yes. But I used to get on, and I think he said to me, come in number 14, your nose is up. And I mean, they had another language, the Beatles, but it was very funny.
But don't rush, none of your 5-bar gate jumps and over sort of stuff. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know, I thought it just sounded distinguished like.
Although I think maybe Swinging London was about 800 people in the 60s. 800 people who used to go to Bieber's, used to go to Vidal Sassoon's, used to dress that way, and the rest of England saw it in newspapers, and everybody anyway, in any other country thought the whole of England was Swinging London, basically. It wasn't, it was London. And when the Beatles came to London, they integrated themselves instantly into it and became part of it and fashion leaders in it, basically. The thing is, the Beatles sort of, and the film, melded in so well with the life of London that you've got a good slice of what London was like in that small area of London. That was it. That was Swinging London. It was wonderfully represented in the movie. Their music was so great, everybody loved them so much, and of course they had naturally they were taken over by, you know, the people that made their clothes, and they fitted in perfectly. And they removed a lot of social barriers as well, you know, because they had great talent, which a lot of the other people in London didn't necessarily have great talent, they just looked good. I used to go to their parties, I used to know them very well. In fact, I think about 4 years ago, I was in the same hairdressers as George Harrison. George said, how are you all right? And I said, yes, I'm fine. I said, actually, I come from the north as well, George. He said, you don't sound like it. And I said, well, I could talk like that as well if I have to, you know.
I'm afraid I don't understand.
Oh, my God, he's a natural.
I must say that they seemed so natural in the film that you felt that they'd made up all their own dialogue, and the writing was so clever. They had really written them, it was written for them. So there was nothing they said that wouldn't have been a normal thing for them to say. They never came out of the character that I knew them in nightclubs. It was just like a continuation of their normal life. It was no different at all. They never seemed to be trying to act. I don't think they ever did try to act. They just did the lines that were given to them, but they translated them themselves, and they were just perfect. I mean, that's why I think it's such a wonderful movie, because it's as though they've walked out of the crowd. They're famous people. You saw all the girls screaming and crying, and that's exactly how it was. I mean, they caused absolute mayhem wherever they went. The people who were with them always thought it was amazing. You know, there was another group of people that they were gods to. To us, they were just, you know, they were very talented friends. There's nothing bad you could say about them, you know. They were really a good example, I thought. Everybody wanted to be like them, you know. They all had their hair cut like the Beatles, you know. They wanted to wear Beatles suits, and they queued up and screamed every time they appeared. And so one realizes, looking back, just how amazing it was, but you didn't realize it necessarily so much at the time. I mean, you knew the effect they had at the time, but you didn't realize you were involved in something that would be going 30, 40 years later, you know. So, hello, here I am, still.